Hey everybody, what's up? So in this video, you're just going to learn how to make a really simple top-down shooter. Nothing crazy, but it's going to teach you a lot of the core concepts and fundamentals of Unreal Engine 4, which is really important, like a very basic UI, spawning monsters, having them chase the player, attack the player, damage the player, having the player be able to spawn these projectiles that damage the enemy and destroy on contact. So just a lot of good things in this tutorial video that I hope you'll go through. And if you're brand new to the engine, I think it'll help you a lot with your development in Unreal Engine 4. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you're on the Unreal Engine tab, go to Library, click Launch. It's going to open up the launcher where you can create projects. So you'll be presented with something like this. You click Games, go to Next, click Third Person. Even though it's a top-down game, we're going to use third person because I like the movement setup for it. So do third person, click Next, and then in here, call your game whatever you want. I'm calling mine Waves Shooter, and then create the project. And I already have my project open so that I can just jump right in. So if you click play, you can see the character can move around. And I like this movement. This is how I want it to be. All I'm going to do is adjust the camera so it's up like this, right? So in order to do that, I can actually click on the character in the level. And over here in the world outliner, I can click edit third person character. It's going to open up the actual blueprint here. And you're presented with all this different code here, but this is just movement, right? So in the viewport, what I'm going to do, or not the camera, but the camera boom here. And then I'm going to rotate it. So if I press E, I have to turn off this. Now I can rotate it. So when you turn off the pitch, it'll let you rotate the camera boom, which as you can see, it's putting the camera above, right? So I rotated mine to -60. And then the length right here, set it to 700. Compile and save. Now the camera boom is way up here, which brings the camera with it because the camera is attached to the camera boom. So now when we play, we got this top-down view like this, right? And this is how I like it for this type of game. So the next thing you want to do is you want to come to your launcher here, go to Marketplace, and let's add the character. So to find the character, go to Free, Epic Games Content, and then just start clicking over. And let's look for her. Her name is Sergeant Bellica, so we just have to find her. She's on one of these pages. She has to be on page 1. There she is, the very first one. Okay, so here she is. Just click her and then add to your project. And it's going to take a little bit to download, so just pause the video and then come back. All right, so once you add it to your project, your content browser might look like this. Just click this button here in the left. Now you'll have all your folders. You can click Paragon Lieutenant Bellica. And what I want you to do is go to Filters, click on Level, and then open her level up. And the reason you want to do this is because it's going to compile all the shaders for you, and that's going to take like 20 minutes, maybe more, maybe less. So pause the video, and when that's done, just come on back. All right, when that's done, here are the 5 characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I can't count. There's 6 characters. It's up to you which character you want to use. They'll all work with this project. They all run on the same animations. So just pick one. I used this one in the example project. So I'm going to select her. I'm going to come to the third person character here. And under mesh, I'm going to click the mesh. And then right here is where we can add that character. So what you need to do is select the character you want. Click the magnifying glass. It'll browse to it. And with this character selected, you can now hit this arrow and plug it in. So there she is. And we need to add in her animations. So this is where you put the animation blueprints right here. If you don't do this, if you forget this step, then your character will just look like this all the time. And when you play, wrong level, let me open up the level. And when you play, she'll just look like this. So you have to plug in the animation. And these characters come with the animations, which is awesome. So what you can do here is either find it in the drop down. I know what it's called. This one's Lieutenant Bellica. But if you didn't know what it's called, then you can always just look for it. It's right here. So I just grab that and plug it in. Nice little shortcut. We don't have to make an animation blueprint from scratch. If you want to learn how to make animation blueprints, there's plenty of tutorials out there. So anyway, now she's plugged in, and when I play, she does animate. But we might have to make some changes because she does that long introduction, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that. Okay, the next thing I want to do is set up her firing. That's pretty fun, right? So let's do that. Let's go to Edit, Project Settings, go to Input. And this is where you input actions and such that you want players to do. So in our case, firing is an action. Axis is more about movement, as you can see, move forward, move right. These are things for your mouse and your game pads and keyboards and things like that. But for action mapping, this is more for like attacks and things like that. So I'm going to type in fire. And in our case, I want this game to work on both a gamepad and the mouse. So I will type in left mouse button. Here it is. And then I'm going to click the plus sign. And in the gamepad here, I believe it's the right trigger axis. The right button on the gamepad. That should be the firing. I think it is. If it's not, you can always come in here and change it and mess around, okay? All right, now in the third person character, we're ready to set up firing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete this because that's virtual reality. We don't need it. This is gamepad input, so we want that because I want it to work with gamepad. Mouse input, we want that. Jumping, I'm actually going to delete jump. I don't want jumping in my game. You can leave it if you want. And then I will also delete touch input because this isn't a touch game. We're not making an Android mobile game. All right, compile, save. I'm going to select all of this stuff here. I'm going to press C for comment, and I will type movement. This is just to keep it organized, and I'm going to move it over here off to the side. And you can change the color of these comment boxes if you want. I'll do something like that. Compile, save. All right, so the next thing we do now to fire, I'm going to right click and just type in fire. And this action event will pop up, which we just made. So if you've never used Blueprint before, this might seem a little difficult, especially if you're brand new to the engine, which you probably are if you're watching this. But we do logic through Blueprint. You do all of your game logic through it. So for example, up here, this input axis turn and look up. These are from the project settings right here, the input. Here's turn and look up. So this is for the mouse. And these two functions here are from the engine. They're from pawn, right? It says pawn. So the reason why this is able to work here is because we're actually a character. You can see in the right corner, it says character. But character is actually a child of pawn. So that's why we're able to inherit this stuff here. These functions come from pawn, but the character can use it because it's a child of the pawn. Okay, so all of the movement logic is actually in the pawn class. You can actually go into C++, open up the pawn class in Visual Studio and look at this logic in C++ if you wanted to. If you've programmed before in the past, then this might make sense. If you've never programmed, then this probably doesn't make sense. And that's okay. You'll learn eventually. Just like anything, it just takes hours and hours. You put in, 1,000 hours into learning the engine and you'll be really good at this stuff. Okay, so think of your journey in Unreal Engine 4 as a very long-term lifestyle, is what I like to say. Okay, like commit to learning this stuff for the next several years and just make this a part of your life. It's a fun hobby and just always be getting better at it. That's the key. Okay, so firing. Now, how do we know if this works? Well, there's this function called print string. So if I drag off and type in print string, when I click the left click, or when I press the fire button, in our case, the mouse is left click or the right trigger axis. But again, you could set it to whatever you want. Either case, when I press that button, it should print whatever it says here. So I can say firing, for example. And this is a good way to help you test things as using print strings. I use them all the time and you'll see in this project. So when I play, when I click left click, it says firing, right? Every time I press it, it says firing. So that means this input is working. Now I do want to get rid of this little introduction she does. I kind of want to get rid of, actually, you know what? We'll leave it. We'll set something up so the player can't move until that intro is finished. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to browse to the animation blueprint here. I'm going to open it. And in the event graph here, it's just blueprint, as you can see. This is what's happening. So the player starts the game. It's going to run this begin play event. And it's playing this montage. Montage is an animation, so it's just playing this when we start the game. That's what begin play. Any class you make in Blueprint, anything you run off of the begin play will fire right at the very beginning of the game or when the class spawns, okay? So as you can see, begin play plays that animation right here, level start. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up, and what I did here is I just browsed to it again. So see, it plays this at the beginning. I'm trying to get the time here. So it's about a 4-second, it's about a 5-second animation. So I'm going to do something that's kind of interesting here. Back in our third-person character blueprint, I can right-click. I'm going to type in begin play. You get this event begin play. And like I said, anything we do off this will fire right away. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in this character movement. This is a cool little tip that you can do. All of these components up here on the left, you can actually drag into the graph editor here, and you can do things with them. You can drag off of this, and there's lots of stuff that you can do with the camera boom, for example. But basically, if you click on it, if I click on character movement, I have all of these things here on the right. These are all the things that you can edit when you drag the component into the editor here. If I click off this, for example, it says gravity scale. If I drag this off and type in gravity scale, you can see it's right here, get gravity scale or set it. So by default, it has 1, but if I wanted to, I could set it to 5 at the beginning of the game. I'm actually going to drag off of this and type in disable. I'm actually going to disable the movement at the beginning. So when I play, I won't be able to move, right? See, I can't move right now. Can't move. I can look around, but I can't move. So I'm going to disable the movement. And then off of here, I'm going to type in delay. And the animation was 5 seconds long. So I'm going to delay for 5 seconds. And then what I'm going to do is there actually is no enable movement. If you type in enable movement, nothing will pop up. So what you actually have to do is you have to get a little creative. I type in movement and it says set movement mode. So I can select that, connect these up, and then actually if I set this to walking, we'll be able to move again. So if we play, we can't move. And then after 5 seconds, we'll be able to move again. So now we can move. So it's like we're doing this little pause for 5 seconds, letting the animation play, and then enabling the character to move. And if you wanted to get really creative, what you could do is use the sequence editor here. Under cinematics, you could make a sequence which might have the camera do something like coming in close on the character, and then all of a sudden like comes back up here, and then the player can move again. If we have time, I'll do something like that, but for now, I just want to get you playing your game. So anyway, we got some very basic movement stuff going on, but let's actually fire the bullet, right? We're going to make that laser that's emissive, that the player can shoot, okay? So to do that, we have to make a new blueprint actor. So up here, I'm just clicking at the base content folder. I'm going to do it right here. So just right click, go to blueprint class. And now you have all these different classes here. So our third person character, for example, is a type character. And like I said, character is a type of pawn that includes the ability to walk around. So here's pawn, which is just above it. You actually won't use pawns too often, but there are cases when you will use them. But for the most part, you'll stick to character for doing things like AI and players and things like that. Player controller, these are actually useful as well. I use these all the time for multiplayer games. Game mode base will need this as well for the actual playing levels. So as an example, I'll use one game mode for the main menu, and then I'll use another game mode for the actual playing levels, or like if you have a lobby system, you might use a different game mode for your lobby and then a different game mode for the actual playable levels. And the same thing for the player controller as well. There are ways where you can use one for everything, but to keep things simple, I'll use a player controller for the lobby levels or like the main menu, things like that, and then a different player controller for the actual game. But for now, what we want to do is just create an actor. So anything in the level is an actor. So characters are actors, like a chair you place is an actor, a movable door is an actor, a bullet that you fire is an actor. So we're going to create an actor, BP underscore laser, I guess. I don't know how to spell laser. There it is. This is what the player will actually fire. Okay, so let's open it up. And on the begin play here, like I said, anytime an actor is spawned in the level, in our case, every time the player presses the fire button, we're going to spawn a laser. And so anything we do off of begin play will fire right away. So in our case here, because it's a bullet, it's getting fired, we might want to play a sound, right? We'll play like the laser sound. So what we do is we drag off of begin play, type in play sound, get play sound at location. Cool. And so the sound, this is where you would plug in the sound. I don't have a sound effect right now, but we'll get one later, and I'll show you how to get sound effects for free. And then for the location here, it's asking us, where do we want to spawn this sound? Where are we going to play it at? And we want to play the laser where it actually spawns in the world. So for example, the player is at location -750, 390 on the Y, and 226 on the Z, right? That's just an example of the location. So wherever this player moves to, the location will change. See, you can see it changing. So what we want to do is spawn the laser's sound wherever the laser is going to be. So when the player presses left click, the laser actor itself will spawn right here on the muzzle. So we want the sound to play right here. Okay? Now, it's actually not complicated. I know it seems complicated, but all that this means is that when the laser spawns right here, it's going to play a sound right here. And the way we do that is we can just right click and type in get actor location. And all this means is that wherever this laser is, when it spawns in the world, that's where we're going to play the sound. So we just plug that into here. You can see the colors are the same. So yeah, it's actually very simple. This get actor location is one of these functions that you'll be using all the time because you're just literally getting the location in the world of where this actor currently is. So this is what we'll do at the very beginning. We'll play a sound, right? It's just going to play the laser firing sound. Now the next thing you want to do is we want to come up to component and add a mesh. So click mesh. I'm actually going to drag it onto the top here because we don't need that scene component. And where is it? If I select it and press F, oh, we don't have it. It's just none here. So you want to type in sphere. And which one do we do? I believe it's just this one, sphere. There we go. And now what I want to do is scale it. Can I type it in? 1.215. There we go. So I can't use the actual scale tool to scale it here, but I can type in the scaling. So I'll just give you the numbers. So instead of 1, do 0.10. And then instead of 1, do 0.1375. So it's just like a bolt. Compile, save. And then now we have to actually make the material. So if you've never made a material before, it's okay. I'll walk you through it. So come to the content browser, right click, go to material. I'm going to type in m_emissive. It can be a very simple emissive material. And this isn't a lesson on materials. There are people that all they do for their job is make awesome materials. It's like that's their job, right? Special effects type stuff. But anyway, to do emissive, you can see there's emissive color here. All we're going to do is holding down number 4 on your keyboard, just hold it down, then click. Get this color. We want it to be a parameter. I'm going to type in color. So make sure you right click it and convert it to a parameter. And right now it's black. I'm going to change it to white. So just open it and go 1, 1, 1. That just does white. And now you can plug this into the base color. And you could plug it into emissive, but what we're going to do is holding down M, you get a multiply node here. So just plug that in and then plug that in. And then off of here, if you right click B, you can now promote to parameter. We'll call this intensity. And now you can set this to 1, for example. Now save. Okay. So again, just pause the video if you need to, but this is how you make a very simple emissive material. Okay. Now this material, we're not going to attach this to the weapon. What we're going to do is we're actually going to right click emissive and create instances. So this is where you can have all these different colors. So for example, let's say we want to make a red laser, right? So MI for material instance, then red, and make sure you're doing create material instance. Now when we open this up, we have these two parameters here. So now we can adjust the colors in here. That's why we took these two things here and made them into parameters. So any value you have in a material, if you convert it to a parameter, you can then edit that parameter in the instances here. So for example, we want red. I'm going to select the box here. I'm going to click this, and then now we can make red. See? So let's do something like this. I guess 1 on the red and 0 on everything else. That makes sense. All right, and then for the intensity, I'm going to check it and then watch when I start bumping it up. It's really bright, right? So you can see how bright it is here. So we might need to do like 150, for example. Now I can browse to this material. I can come back in the laser and then I can apply it to the mesh here. Boom. Look how bright that is. So again, now with this material set up, you can duplicate this. So you don't want to right click and create another material instance because then you have to come in here and set up all the parameters again. So what you do is you just duplicate the material instances. So now I'll call this one MI, blue, for example. Open it up, change this to blue, right? 1 here, 0, 0. Okay. Now I can take this, plug that in, we have a blue laser. Okay, so you can just keep on making more instances here. Maybe we want green. So now we do 1 on the green, 0 on the blue. Now we have green. I can plug that in. So now we have green. Okay. So you can keep going, making all different colors that you want. Leave that up to you. Okay, so we need to set up a way to make the mesh register hits. And the way you do that is through collision. So if you click on the static mesh here, you scroll down, you have collision settings here. Okay, collision is really important. It's probably the most important thing to learn and understand as a beginner. You have all these different collision presets here, and you can actually come into the project settings and come over to collision, and then here are all those presets. You can actually make your own presets. You can make your own object channels. And as an example, this static mesh by default has an object channel of world dynamic. And what that means is that it's most likely just going to block everything. You can see the object type here, world dynamic. We have pawn, physics body, etc. And so it's kind of confusing, but basically in these settings, so for example, pawn, that's our character, right? Our character's a pawn. If we open up pawn, pawns will block world dynamic objects. That's what this means. So a pawn will block all of these things, right? The vehicle hits the player, it's going to block it. Okay, so this laser, by default, static meshes are world dynamic. So this means that the player, because the player here, if you come to the capsule component, this is the player's collision, basically. This capsule component is set to pawn. That means by default, it's going to block world dynamic objects. Now, you don't have to use these presets. You can go to custom here, and then you can set them how you want. And actually, what I want to do is I don't want the pawn to block the camera. So I can either set it to custom and change it here, or I could come into the project settings, open up pawn here and set it to camera. I'm actually going to keep it on custom because for me, I always just set things to custom. I'll just come to custom and then change things around. So I'll make it so camera is not blocked. But I'll keep all these how they are here. And then here's where you can, you can disable collision, enable collision, do query only, etc. Query just means overlapping, not like physically blocking objects. And we'll actually use query for a lot of things. Like when I do melee combat, I usually use query for a lot of the combat, because you don't want your actual weapon getting blocked by the model, like the physical model. Like imagine your sword is actually getting blocked by the player. That means it would hit the player but not be able to like go through the player, if that makes sense. So query is really important for certain things. Then you have physics and all that, but I'm not going to really simulate physics or anything. But again, collision, it's not advanced at all, but it's very important for beginners to study the collision, learn about it. Epic has a lot of documentation on collision, so I highly recommend you check it out. This one's really important here as well. Generate overlap events. If this is false, then the object that you're working with won't do any collision stuff. So they might still be able to block objects and things like that, but for the laser, for example, if we turn off generate overlap events, then we can't overlap the player down here. These are all the different events you can do. But what we want to do with our object here is that I want this mesh to, we're not going to use an overlap. So if I was going to use an overlap, for example, I would come down here and say on component begin overlap. And like I said, overlaps are really important. You'll use them a lot in your game development. Like for a door, like if you want the player to have a door, or if you want a door to automatically open when a player gets close to it, then you would use an overlap event. Or maybe you have like a spawner, like the player walks into a certain area and you have an invisible box there that will basically fire an event when the player walks into it. Like maybe it spawns a bunch of monsters, then you'd use an overlap for that. But for our case, what I'm going to do with the static mesh here is I'm going to click this simulation generates hit events. So compile save. And now what we can do, I want to use event hit, this one right here. This is the one I want. So just right click, type in event hit, and then you'll get that. And this one's really important because we don't have to add an actual, like, here's collision down here. We actually don't have to add a sphere collision or something onto it. We can actually just use the mesh by itself. Now what I want to do with the collision here is in your project settings in the collision tab, I'm actually going to set up a new object channel. So click new object channel. I'm going to call it a projectile, and by default it's block, right? So anything it hits will block it. So accept that. And what I'm going to do now in the laser is I'm actually going to set this to custom on the static mesh, and the object type will be a projectile. But actually I need to compile save and close this and then reopen it, and then it should show up. Yeah, so now it shows up. So you have to reopen the blueprint so the object type will show up. So I'm going to change it to projectile here. And what this is going to mean is that in the player, so I have to reopen this blueprint as well, because down here, you're going to see it says object responses. When I reopen this blueprint, you'll see projectile here, watch. So I'll browse to it first, and then I'll close it, then I'll reopen it. And now under the capsule component, you see projectile. And it says block, so that's what we want. Now, what's really important here is that the capsule component, this is responsible for damage and things like that. You can set it up to where the actual player mesh can register damage and things like that, but I'm not going to go over that in this video because this is just like an example, simple game that we're making. But understand that yes, you can do mesh collision, which is really important for first-person shooters, right? You don't want to shoot like in this empty area but register a hit because it's the capsule. You don't want to do that. You want to do hits through the actual player mesh. And so I do have a tutorial series on making a survival game. I'll link to it in the description, and that one we are using the mesh. Okay, so that's like an FPS if you want to, or no, that's still a third-person shooter, but we're registering bullet shots through the actual mesh. And that's because that's a multiplayer game. It's designed to have other players, and so that works for that type of game. But for this type of game, we're just going to keep things simple. It's single player, and the only thing that's going to be hitting the player our actual AI, right? So there's no reason to get crazy with the collision. But anyway, you can see here that the third person character blocks projectile. I'm actually going to have the player ignore projectiles. That's because it's going to spawn close to the player. I just want to make sure that this player doesn't collide with the bullet when it gets spawned. The AI, we'll have the AI block it though, but for the player itself, no, we want to ignore the projectile. Now with that said, we're still gonna have to do another check because in the actual laser, if you come to the mesh, it says it blocks pawns. So this mesh might still block with the player. And then if that happens, we'll just do some additional code to make sure that it won't collide with the player. But for now, this is what we're gonna do. So let's just get the player shooting this projectile. We're not gonna do anything with this event hit yet. I just want this projectile to actually spawn in the world. So what I want to do is come up to add component, type in projectile, and you'll get projectile movement. So like you might imagine, this is actually responsible for moving the object in the world when it spawns. So this initial speed and this max speed here, if I set these to 3000, and then the gravity scale I'm going to set to 0, so there is no gravity. When I hit simulate, you'll see it moving, see? I have this checked, but I don't think it matters. I'm gonna come down here under planar movement. I'm gonna check this, and then I'm gonna put a 1 on the Z. And there is one more thing I want to set up. So if you click on class defaults in any blueprint is very important. Any variables you make down here will get added to the class default. So you can set those defaults in here. So I'm gonna disable the tick. We don't need that. And then if you're playing a multiplayer game, you would turn on replicates here. This isn't multiplayer, it's just single player, so you don't have to worry about that. And then down here is important, this initial lifespan. This sets how long this laser will last in the world. So if I set it to 0, it will last forever. But we obviously don't want the lasers lasting forever. I'm gonna set it to 3 so that, you know, the player shoots, if it doesn't hit anything, it will just go away after 3 seconds. All right, and then we actually want the player to spawn it. So well, what we want to do is the player presses fire. We can do what's called if you type in spawn actor, you can get spawn actor from class. I can actually plug in this laser, but it wants a spawn transform. What this is asking is where to spawn it in the world. Well, obviously we want to spawn it near the player, right? So what I like to do, in our case here, you can't really spawn it on the gun here because the gun's attached to the player. But what we can do is I can come up here and I can add what's called just an arrow component. Unfortunately, you can't use this one that's inherited. I can add this and just call it spawner. And then now I can take this and position it kind of close to the gun. Okay, something like that. Maybe up one more. And from a top-down view, it'll look like it's coming out of the gun. Okay, so a very simple way of doing it. So it's not compiling because it needs something in the transform. So I can take this spawner now. I might need to move it under the mesh, but for now, let's just do this. And I can right-click and do get, or I can do transform. You'll get world transform. Plug that in, and then now it will compile. So now in the viewport, you can see how it's here. Now what I want to do is by default, these arrows are hidden in game. So if you click on the arrow, the spawner here, you scroll down, it says hidden in game. This means the arrow will actually, you won't be able to see it, right? But if I uncheck that just for debugging purposes, I can now see it. And I want to see what happens when we move the player around. Let's see what happens to the arrow. So see how the arrow is attached? Okay. Our laser is huge. And then what's happening is I am spawning it, but it's obviously huge and that's not going to work. So, and what you actually saw there was the camera getting blocked by the projectile. And the camera tends to get blocked a lot. And if you remember, I was talking about that earlier. So in the laser here, in the mesh, want to ignore camera. Let's see if that fixes that issue. Yeah, so that fixes the camera issue. Obviously, I got to fix the laser there, but you can see I'm not getting stuck in the actor anymore. I got to fix the actor. This scale doesn't work. When you set it here, I forgot about that. This just doesn't work. And the way we can actually do that to get this scale to work, it's not like a hack or whatever, but basically, whenever you have a mesh or an object that's just at the root here, the scaling actually doesn't work, or transform or whatever. So for example, if we come to the third person character, if I click on this capsule, I can't really like move it around or rotate it. Even if I scale it, it's actually not going to scale. I have to adjust it through the shape here. So what you can do, you can either add a scene component on top of it, or you can set the scale when you spawn it. And I'd rather set the scale when I spawn it, because the less components we have in here, the better on performance, right? It's just one less thing for the engine to load. So I will keep this scale number here because we're going to need it just as a reference. But if I come to the third person character now, what I can do here is I can actually drag off of this spawn transform and type in make transform. And then down here, I can now set the scale. Okay. So what I found a good scale to be is 1 on the X, 0.10 on the Y, then 0.1375, right? I think that's what we had here, something like that. And then instead of get world transform here, we now need a location. So now we can just drag off here and do get world location. Plug that in. And then rotation, there's another function we can use here. It's called get actor forward vector. And from this vector, we can actually get a rotation. So if I drag off this and type in rotation from X vector, there it is. Just plug that in. So I know if you're brand new, some of this stuff is foreign, but the more you play with this engine, the more you'll start to understand what we're doing. We're just getting the location of this spawner in the world. And as you saw, it's following the player around. So as you can see, the spawner is in front of the player. Then once we start playing, it's following the player. So when I left click, this location of this arrow is where we'll spawn, right? Now the thing is obviously way too big. Now it's not moving because I'm pretty sure it's colliding with the player, so it's stopping. And again, that's because collide with pawn. I need to make this a lot smaller. Maybe something like that. So this is the number I need to remember, 0.8. And then this number here, I can actually copy it and then paste it. All right, let's see if it's a little smaller. Yeah, see, so now it's actually firing. It's not getting stuck on the player now. Now it is. So I'm just messing around with the numbers here, trying to get a good number. I'm happy with the size there, but is it still getting stuck on the player? That's the question. So it is. And the reason for that is because it's spawning on the middle. So the middle of the object here, this is 0, 0, 0. That's spawning right on this part here. So actually half of the mesh is over here, so it's touching the player. I just need to drag this out. That. Now hopefully it won't collide with the player anymore. See, so it's not colliding with the player anymore. So you can see it hits an object and then it disappears after 3 seconds. So even if the player fires off screen, it'll disappear after 3 seconds. And then, yeah, so now we got shooting. So now that we know it's spawning and shooting, I can come back into the player here. I can select the spawner arrow and then just set it back to hidden. Now it's going. Okay, so one other thing, I don't want the player to be able to fire while in this little intro animation. So I'm going to come down here, make a new variable. It's going to be a Boolean called can fire. So if you don't know what a Boolean does, all it means it's a true false check. I'll show you. So I'm going to drag this off here. So by default, Booleans are false. So after 5 seconds, I'm going to set can fire to true. So now it's true. And then down here, you can drag the Boolean into the world, or I'm sorry, into the editor. And then I can right click and get a branch. This is like a if statement. It's basically saying if can fire is true, do this. If it's false, do that. In our case here, we only want to be able to fire if it's true, right? So after 5 seconds, we set it to true, and then once it's true, we fire. So just to go back here, you can drag this into the world. It's going to ask you if you want to get it or if you want to set it. If you get it, it's going to be small like this. And then set means you can set value. So if you have a float, for example, these floats here, if you set it, then you can set new numbers. So you can set things like HP and things like that, which we'll get into. But now I won't be able to fire until 5 more seconds. So I'm clicking, 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 clicking. Now I can fire 5 seconds later. Okay. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to disable shadows on the static mesh. I actually don't know where to do that. There it is, under lighting, cast shadow. No, do not cast shadows. I'm actually going to right click and type in self. I'm going to plug this into the owner. So the player is the owner of this laser. Every time he shoots, the player is the owner. That's what this self is. This self is actually really useful as well. You'll use this a lot in your game development. And all it means is you're just plugging in a reference to this blueprint. So in our case here, we're just plugging in the third person character. In this blueprint, for example, it would be the laser. All right, so now I want to actually register hits, right? Because it's a single player game, the laser is only going to register hits or cause damage to AI. So let's come to the content browser here and let's make a new character. We'll call this the BP underscore enemy base. Call it the base because from here we can make children. And so you can have one base enemy where you have all the core functionality, and then you make children for all the different AIs, like all the different monsters you have. In our case, I'm going to make a new child. We'll call this the enemy underscore green enemy. And the reason why is because we're going to use this asset pack, which is also from Paragon. It's called Minions. And so you're going to need to add this. I forgot, you have to add this as well. So type in Paragon once again. And we just got to find what's called Minions here. So we come over here and we have Minions right here. So just add this to the project, do the same thing where you open the level, let it compile, and then come back to the video. Okay, so pause the video now, add this to your project. This is the level when all your minions are compiled. This is what it should look like. And you have a lot of different minions here. And I've gone through a lot of them. And the problem is that some of the death animations are pretty weird, like they end abruptly. And I'm not really sure how how Epic originally used the death. But I know with this guy here, his death animation is pretty good. So I'll use him for this example. I'm gonna make a new folder here and just call it underscore AI. And this just puts it at the top with the underscore. I'm going to drag the enemy base in here. And this guy we'll call forest or something because he's got plants on him. I already did enemy green here, right? Maybe you want to use this one. We'll call it enemy forest. So in here, I'm going to open this up. And now for the mesh, I want to add this mesh here. So I need to come to the details panel here. Here's the mesh. I can just browse to it. And with it selected, I can just add it to the mesh. All right. And like before, I need to rotate it 90 degrees because it needs to be facing this blue arrow. And then pressing W, I can drag down. And I'm going to go to a right view here so I can get it really accurate. I'm going to turn off snapping. Okay. Let's now fix the capsule. It's obviously way too big. So I'm going to click on the capsule component. Change the height to maybe 60. And I should have actually changed the capsule first, because now I want to bring this guy up. Maybe 66 is good. Back to a right view here. Turn off snapping again. Okay, so 66 is still too big. Let's try like 62. Seems about right. And now the width. I want to change the width now. So the radius, let's try 30. So 30 seems to be pretty good. So anywhere that the player hits on this capsule will do damage to the AI. Now what we want to do with the player, we have the player shooting the laser. So in the laser, we got to set up this hit event here now. So we basically want to say that when this laser hits something, then do something. So for example, we want to open up the base class, and you can do that if you're in a child. You can click this wrench over here on the right, and it will open up its base class. So the base class is where we do most of our logic. Unless you want this specific enemy to do its own like unique abilities or something, you might as well just put all the logic in the base class, because anything we do here in the base class, all of the enemies can use it. So for example, I'll put health in the base class. I'll do damage in the base class. I'll do, you know, dying in the base class. We'll do the AI like roaming logic and stuff in the base class. We do that in the base class because then all of its children can use it. So in the enemy base, for example, let's create a variable and just call it health. And we'll make this a float. And now we have health. So now we have health in the enemy base. If I come to the child here, this enemy force, if I click on defaults, you can see health up here. So now if I come to health in the base class and change its category to health, whoops. If I change it to health and compile, now in the force, it's going to say health here in the category. So let's say as a default, we'll set its health to 100. And other enemies, like if you were to make other enemies, you could set their health to whatever you want. I'm also going to turn off tick here, actually. We got the health is set to 0 on the enemy base, but I'm actually going to set this to 100 on the base class too, just so we have a base setting. But maybe you have like a big enemy that has like 300 health or something. So the next thing we want to do is with this hit event, we got to do something that says whether we hit the enemy or not. We want to know what we hit. If I just do this, if I do a print string here, you'll notice print strings are really important to use because I can just plug in this other right here. This is just other actor object reference. And actors, remember, enemies are actors, rocks are actors, trees are actors, everything's an actor, right? So if I plug this in, compile, save, and then if I come to our third person example map, when I shoot something, it should print the name. See in the left corner? It's actually hitting itself there, hitting the wall 11, hitting wall 9, hitting the linear stair, hitting the cube mesh. So you can see it's registering what we're hitting. If I take this enemy, I put him in the world here, and then when I play, I know I got this really annoying 5-second intro, but it is what it is. When I play, you can see it's saying I hit the enemy forest. And I actually just noticed another issue. The enemy's a little small. Definitely want to make him a little bigger. So let's come to the enemy here. We're gonna scale him up. Let's hit this lock so it's all uniform. Let's go 1.2. Let's just see how that looks. Still pretty small. I'm gonna put him next to player. You can see still really small. So let's try 1.4. Okay, that's better. Let's do 1.4. And now we got to fix the capsule again. So let's just do default. And let's move the mesh down again. This is just part of game development. And there you go. That's actually looking perfect. It's pretty big. That's fine. I'm happy with that. There we go. Okay, so you can see it's registering his name in the top left corner. So I really encourage you to get good with print strings. Use these all the time. Trust me, anytime you make something, run a print string to see if it's at least feeding the proper information in the corner, because that'll help you a lot in your debugging process. So anyway, we know it's working, so now I can delete it. We know it's registering hits. So now we want to do something when it hits the enemy. So in a lot of courses, they'll have you cast. They'll go like, cast to enemy base, like this, but we actually don't need to do that. You can do what's really simple and just come to the enemy base here, come to your defaults, and at the top here, just type in tag. And we can add a tag to this and just call it the enemy. And what we can say now on this BP laser, off of this other, we can type in tag And there's this function called actor has tag. And then right here, we can enter the name of enemy. And then off of this Boolean, remember we use a branch node, right? A true or false. So we just got to hold down B and then click and get a branch node. And so now all we're saying here is event hit. Is this actor that we hit in the world, is it an enemy? If it is, do this. If it's not an enemy, then do that. Well, in our case, if it's not an enemy, let's just destroy the projectile, right? So when I play, we're basically saying anything that this laser hits that's not an enemy, let's just destroy it. See, so it destroys on contact now. If I hit the enemy, it's not going to destroy. See? So that's what's going on here. Now, if we do hit the enemy, what do we want to do? Well, we want to apply damage. So Epic comes with these damage functions by default. So if I come off the true here and I go apply, we have this damage. You can do just, this is like any damage. I'll just use regular damage. Apply damage. In damage class, make sure you select just damage type here. It comes with the engine as well. And then the base damage here, we can just set the damage. If you want, just set it to something like 25. All this means is that every time it hits the enemy, in our case, it will do 25 damage. And our enemy has 100 health, so after 4 shots, it will die. Right now, nothing's really going to happen because we haven't set up the event here. But remember here, remember in our third-person character, when we fire, we're spawning this laser. And then I plugged in this owner, right? I said the self is the owner. If we come into the actual laser now, when this laser spawns, it knows the player is the owner. So for this damage causer right here, I can type in get owner. I can plug that into the causer there because it's asking for an actor. Instigator asks for like a player controller, for example. And you can use that as well. You could also come into the instigator here and plug in your player controller. And in our case, we won't do that, but you will have cases where you're spawning stuff from your player controller and maybe you want to plug in the player controller to the instigator. Because the player controller exists both on the server and the client, and it persists. So like, for example, if you're playing a multiplayer game and you have a bunch of characters running around your level, right? You're playing like Call of Duty or whatever. When you kill a player, its character dies on the screen, you know, does like its death animation, then it despawns and the player respawns. So in that case, what's happening is this character actually gets deleted and then it gets respawned as a new character. It's the same player, but it's just like his new character's got all his health back and everything. So the player controller doesn't get deleted, but the character gets deleted, if that makes sense. Okay, so in our case, we're shooting with the character, so we want the character to spawn the laser. Now, in the enemy base here, actually, let's come to the laser. So we're doing this apply damage. How do we actually transfer this damage to the enemy now? Well, if you come to the enemy base, if I right-click and type in damage, we now have these events here. Event any damage, point damage, radial damage. Well, we just did any damage, so I'm going to grab that. And now again, if I do print string, I can plug in the damage type here. And so let's see if we can register damage. It should say 25 in the left corner if it's working. Okay, it's not working. And the reason it's not working is because I didn't plug in the damage actor here. That's a mistake. So I just got to plug that in. And the damage actor is this enemy, right? It's coming here. We're checking, we're making sure this actor is the enemy. So now let's plug it in. And you can see it says 25 in the corner. Okay. Now what I also want to do is after we hit the enemy, I do want to destroy the laser as well, or else it's just going to keep hitting itself, and we don't want that to happen. There are other ways we can prevent it from collision as well. So we hit the enemy and we're doing 25 damage each time. But just to make sure we're not hitting other projectiles, I can come to the static mesh here in the laser and I can have it ignore projectile down here. This is just so it won't hit itself. Okay, even though we're destroying it, it's just another safe thing that we're doing. We actually don't need this break result anymore. Okay, so now we're hitting the enemy and we're applying damage. Now remember, this force has 100 health. And the player is dealing 25 damage with each laser bullet. So let's come here and we can do some simple logic. We can say, we can get our health, for example. So this health is 100. The damage coming in is 25 per hit. So we want to update the health. So how do we do that? Well, because this is 100 and this is 25, we want to subtract this damage from the health of the enemy. So we can just do something simple like a float minus a float. Just type in minus minus. So we can go 100 minus 25 equals what? It's going to equal 75. If we do a print string here, it'll say 75. So we need to set this health to 75. So the way you do that is just drag off, set health, connect it up there. So what's happening is the health is 100. We have 100 minus 25. It's now 75. When the enemy gets hit again, it's now going to be 75 minus 25. Now it's 50. It gets hit again. Now it's 50 minus 25. So on and so forth. Basically what happens is after 4 hits, the enemy dies. So we can do what's called a custom event. Just right click, type in custom. You can now add a custom event. We'll call it death. Just death, right? What we can say is when the health is equal to 0 or less than 0, kill the enemy. And the way you do that is I can bring out the health here. And I can go, is health less than or equal to 0? Again, we have a Boolean here, so we have to use a branch. So I can hold down B and click. So we can say, every time the enemy gets hit, we're going to check if the health is less than or equal to 0. If it's not less than 0, then just do nothing. But if it is, then let's kill the enemy, right? So to see if this works, I can do a print string and type in enemy dead. So after 4 hits, hopefully this death event will be called. All right, so let's see if that works. Whoops, I missed. 1, 2, 3, 4. Top left corner says enemy dead, so we know it's working. Now with that, what we want to do is actually play some sort of animation when the enemy dies. And the way we do that is we can just play an animation, right? So let's come to the minions here, but this folder is really big. I'm not sure where this enemy is, so I'm just going to select it here and browse to him. Okay, so we come to this folder. There's an animations folder here. He's called buff_white. So in his animations here, there should be a death. So here's a little death animation. We don't want that one though. It kind of stops midway. Could use that one. That one kind of stops as well. Maybe that one. Let's use that one. Or no, that one kind of... See, these deaths kind of like stop abruptly. Like it stops with his leg up in the air. That just looks weird. I'm not really sure why it does that. See, this one, he's like in midair dead. Don't really understand. It's just kind of the downfall of these... of this pack, I guess. Let's just use this one. So we can grab this and I can say play animation from the mesh. It automatically brings out the mesh. I can plug that in. And if this doesn't work, we'll do another way. We'll do it through the animation blueprint. So when I shoot him 4 times, plays the animation, so he dies. You can see it kind of stops abruptly, looks weird. And that's just because the Paragon game, I'm not sure how they program the actual, death. Maybe it plays the death animation and then they do some like ragdoll setting or something. I don't know. Anyway, we'll just leave that for now like this. And then what we can do is we can delay for like, 5 seconds and then destroy actor. So basically what is happening here is the enemy loses all of its HP. The enemy dies. We play the death animation. And then after 5 seconds, we remove the enemy from the world. Okay, so just to show this in action. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then after 5 seconds, he'll disappear. And there he goes, okay. So now let's make him actually chase the player, right? When I previously made this game, I used behavior trees, but we're not going to do that because it's such a simple project. There's no reason to. We'll just do some simple chasing. But we still need an AI controller. So we got to go to the enemy folder here, the AI folder, and we need to right click and create a class. And it's going to be under this all classes tab. So you got to click that and then type in AI controller. You want the detour crowd controller. So hit select and then type in BP underscore AI controller. Okay, now back in the enemy base here, you gotta come to your class defaults. And under pawn, you'll see AI controller class. We have to select this and choose our BP AI controller. And then for this auto possess AI, just do placed in world or spawned. Okay, that's it. And now let's open up this AI controller here. So we got to do a few things in here. We got to add what's called a pawn sensing component. So in add components, you can just scroll down. There's pawn sensing. We want the AI to sense the player, right? Especially for like a wave type game that we're making. The AI is going to spawn and detect the player almost instantly and start running to the player. So to do that, I'm going to set the peripheral vision angle to 180. This is basically 360. You'll see the player at any angle. The sight radius, I'll keep it at 5,000 for now. We might need to bump that up. And then here in the event graph, we want to right click and there's an event called on possess. Basically what this means, this is almost like a begin play, but basically what this means is when the AI is spawned, when the character is spawned, you know, it has this AI controller class. This AI controller is going to run logic here too, because it's going to say, okay, the AI spawned, I am possessing this AI. So now let's run logic here. So all I want to do with this is I'm just going to cast to enemy base here. And then I can promote this to a variable and we'll call it, actually, no, I'll just call it enemy. So now we can access anything in our enemy from this variable here. We can access death, for example, if we wanted to. We could access health. So you could actually do a lot of logic in the AI controller, but I'm not really going to do that. What I want to do though is do the target sensing. Okay, so here it is. So if you click pawn sensing, there's these events here on the right. On cpawn, hear noise, etc. We want on cpawn. So basically, this is saying when the AI senses a pawn, meaning we're going to say if it's the player, then do something. Okay, so the sensing interval is every 0.5 seconds. You can change that to 1 second if you want to be a little better on performance, but I'll just keep it at 0.5. So how do we know if it's sensing the player? Well, we can use the actor has tag again, I believe. Yep, actor has tag. And so in our third person character, which is the player, in our defaults, let's set a tag for the player now. So I'm just gonna type in tag, call it player. So now here I can type in player. And now we can do something when we sense a player. Okay, if it's true, then we actually want to promote this to a variable. Actually, we want to take this off and do promote to variable. And we'll call this the player target. Okay, and I'm going to show you why we're doing this. So if it's true, if we sense a player, set it to the player target. Okay, now this next part's actually really important. It might be confusing. So I'm going to drag off the player here and we're going to do a get. I'm going to right click and do convert to validated get. And what we're doing here is I'm saying if this variable is set already, then don't do anything. Don't continue. If this variable has not been set, then let's continue. It's not valid, so we want to set this variable. And the reason why we're doing this is because once the AI senses the player, we don't want to keep running this over and over again, right? We don't want this logic running every 0.5 seconds. So we'll just have it not do anything because the variable is now valid, so we won't do anything. So basically what's happening is this whole thing will only get ran one time. The AI will spawn, it will sense the player, and it will never set the player ever again, which is what we want. Unless the player, in your game, like you might have a situation where the player runs away from the enemy and the player gets far enough away and you want to reset the AI, then you would set this variable to nothing. You would just bring it out somewhere and you just leave it empty. But in our case, the player spawns, or in our case, the AI spawns, it senses the player, it sets it to a variable, and then because it's now valid, it will stop running. Okay? So I know it's kind of confusing, but it's a really important part of this logic here. Now, once the player target has been set, we want to run an event that will have the AI move to the player. So if I come to the enemy base here, I can do a new custom event. We'll call it move to player, or maybe chase player is better. And then we actually want to make an input now in this event. What we want to do is we want this AI character, we want the forest character, for example, to chase the player, right? So we're doing the chase logic here in the enemy base. You could do it in the AI controller, but I'm going to do it here. So the way we do that is we need our character to know what this player target is. The way we do that is actually here in the event, we need to add an input. So the question is, what do we add here, right? Well, we need to add this target, and this target is a pawn. So here in the event, I can search for pawn. It's an object, right? It's blue. And then here I can just type in target for the input. And so now it says target. And so now what I can do is in the AI controller, because we set the enemy base here at the beginning, I can actually bring out the enemy here. And now I can type in chase player, and then we get that event, hook it up. And now the player target, we can plug in the target, and I'm going to connect it like this. So now if you double click chase player, it brings us to the enemy, and now target's coming through, right? So what we want to do is we want the AI to chase the player, right? So there's a function called AI move to. We want to set it here. I think pawn is a reference to self, I think. And destination we can ignore because we have a target actor that we're moving to. Okay, so we can actually test this right now, but before we test it, we actually need what's called a nav mesh. So you go to place actors, type in nav mesh, and you'll get this nav mesh bounds volume. And this basically is a volume that says where the AI can travel to. So if I scale it up with the S key and then move it around, if I press P, all this green is where the AI can move to. If I come to the world outliner, there's this recast nav mesh default. So if you ever delete your nav mesh, make sure you also delete this recast nav mesh. So when you drag the nav mesh in the world, it creates this nav mesh actor. So make sure you delete this also if you delete the nav mesh. And now when I play, he moves to the player. So we don't want to stop on success, right? So what's happening is it successfully reaches the player. And that's it. We want it to always move to the player, at least for the most part. We're going to make some changes where when it reaches the player, let's do like an attack. So actually, let's just set that up now. Custom event attack. Right, we want the AI to attack. So on success, attack the player. What we can do here is we can play an animation. The animation to play is I'm just going to hit this browse key on the death. It'll take us to animations. Play this animation, for example, right? So I have this animation selected. I can plug this in there. And when the AI gets to the player, it'll play. So now this is an issue with the camera. again, this is why we have to set up the collision. So on the mesh here, you can see that the mesh on the enemy base, I'm on the enemy base right now, the mesh is blocking the camera. So we want to actually set this to custom under the presets just so we can disable camera. Now let's play. And then now it's not doing that, okay? So you can see it does attack, but this stuff is actually kind of ugly. It's not the prettiest, so we're gonna actually set up an animation blueprint to make this much prettier. Okay, so let's come to our AI folder. And we need to make an animation blueprint here, but it's gonna ask us for a skeleton. I just wanna make sure I have the right skeleton here. I can open up the mesh. The skeleton is called minion underscore skeleton. Okay, here it is. I'm going to browse to it. And then I can right click and create an animation blueprint. We'll call this the anim bp underscore, what am I calling this? Forest? Okay. I'm just going to drag it to our AI folder and move here. All right, so let's open this up. So animation blueprint. This is how we can drive just a better looking animation so we don't have to do all that play animation in our blueprint graph here. But I don't want to get too in depth with the animation blueprint because you can definitely do a lot of crazy advanced stuff with it, but I'll just keep it as simple as possible. What I want to do here is on this update animation, I'm going to drag off of this get pawn owner. I'm going to type in is valid with the question mark. And all we're doing is saying only continue animating this animation if the character is actually valid, meaning this forest is actually spawned in the world. Okay, so, or not this enemy, if this enemy is spawned in the world. So anyway, what we want to do, we want to get a few values here. So again, if you're brand new to the engine, it's probably going to seem a little advanced, but just I'll try to explain it as best I can. We got to get the speed of the enemy, basically the speed that the enemy is moving. So if you come to the enemy here and you go to the character movement, come to the walking, it has this walk speed here. So we can actually get this number by calculating its velocity and converting that to a float. So if I come to the animation blueprint, off of this pawn here, I can type in get velocity, and then off of this return value here, this vector, I can type in length. And then this gives us a float. So like I said, I know it might not make any sense, and it's okay. Just try to remember this. Just like memorize what this is, and then you can promote this, and we'll call this the speed. So this will give us the speed of the enemy. Like this is running on tick, so this variable is constantly being updated. Okay, and what we're going to do with it is in the animation graph up here. So the way animation blueprints work is you have your blueprint event graph, and then you also have your animation graph. The animation graph, we can actually create what's called a state machine. If you type in state machine, you get add new state machine. I'm just going to call it the locomotion. And when I enter into this, I can create a new state. We'll call this the idle state. Connect it up. All we're doing in idle is we're just going to play an idle animation. So if you come to the asset browser, it'll show you all the animations that are rigged, or rather that will work with this enemy. So I'm just going to drag in idle 1 or idle A. And if you look in the right, it says you have like play right here. You can adjust the speed of it. You can say if it's looping or not. We definitely want this animation to loop because it's an idle animation. But now in the event graph, in order to get this to work, or I'm sorry, not the event graph, but the locomotion animation graph here, we need to connect this up. Then when I compile, you can see it's idle. And then what we need to do is we need to plug this animation blueprint into our actual enemy. So in the forest, click on mesh. And then here it says animation class none. This is for animation blueprints. We can plug in the forest. If I disconnect this chase player, now he's just idling, see? Let's hook that back up. All right, back to the animation blueprint. Let's open up our locomotion. So this is our idling state, but when the AI is moving, we want it to be doing something. So let's make a new state and call it jogging. And then let's connect it up. And then we also want to drag an arrow back. And then these are basically Booleans here. So if I open this up, it's saying what needs to happen so that the AI is jogging. Well, in our case, if you come to the enemy here, the enemy is idle when its speed is 0, right? It's not moving, so its speed is 0. So we can do some logic that basically says when the speed is greater than 0, the AI is jogging, right? So what I'm going to do is up here, I'm just going to bring out our speed variable in this transition here. And I can go when speed is greater than or equal to, for example, 300, then start jogging. In our case, the AI is going to move at 600 speed. So 300 is more like, this is fine. And this error is because I need to set up the transition for going back. So what happens when, so what needs to happen so that the AI starts idling? Well, basically, the speed needs to be less than, like, you can just put in 1, for example. And then the AI will go back to idling. So now if I come over here, let's move the AI over here. I didn't finish the jogging, so we got to open up jogging here and plug in an actual jogging animation. So let's come over to our asset browser. Let's just look for a sprint forward. Okay. Plug that in. So now you can see him coming to the player and he attacks. Cool. So as you saw there though, he attacks and then it gets really ugly. That's because we don't want to use just a straight up attack animation like this. When you do play animation like that, it kind of ends the animation blueprint. So instead what we want to do is actually what's called a montage. So we come back to its animations here. We have this jungle attack. I'm going to use this instead. This actually comes with, you can make your own montages. You can just right click, create animation montage. And montages are really powerful because you can add multiple animations in there. You can add different sections so you can play random attack animations. You can loop animations, things like that. I don't want to get too in depth with them because they're kind of advanced, but if you go through my Udemy courses, I go over a lot of that stuff. So anyway, I'm just going to grab this jungle attack here. I'm going to come back to the enemy base. Instead of this whole play animation thing, I'm going to do play montage. I do need to plug the mesh back in here. And then the montage to play, I don't want to plug in this montage right into the enemy base because, I mean, if you have a ton of different enemies, they're not all going to use the same montage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and then promote this to a variable. This is now the attack montage. And now what I can do is in the actual enemy forest blueprint, I can set that attack now. So I can come to the content browser, jungle attack, plug it in, and I think he should attack. So he's going to run over to the player. Oh, it's because we didn't set up the slot in the animation blueprint. This is just something you have to do when using montages. You have to come to the animation blueprint, come to the animation graph here, drag off of here and type in slot, default slot, hook it up. And the way slots work is you can have all these different slots for like upper body, full body, all this different stuff. If you actually open up the animation blueprint for this Bellica, watch, I'll open her up. You can see they got a lot more stuff going on here. But if I come to the animation graph, let's find where they're using slots. Slot upper body. They got all these different slots, so you can do all this different stuff depending on your different poses and stuff like that. But again, this is pretty advanced. I don't want to get into it. I'm just going to keep things simple for you since you're a beginner. We just set it to the default slot, and I think it should work now. Yeah, so you can see how we attack there. So now how do we make the AI actually damage the player? if you open up that jungle attack, it comes with this animation montage window thing right here that you can move around. You can also expand it, move it. All we care about is this beginning part. We don't care about the end point. We care about the beginning point. And we want this beginning point to be the part in the animation that would actually damage the player. So for example, the AI swings like right here. When the animation gets to about here, we're gonna see if a player is like in this area, and if a player is, then apply damage. So the way we do that is in the enemy base, there's this on notify begin and on notify end. This begin is that beginning point right here, and the end is that point. So it's up to you. You could do stuff on the end point if you want, but in our case, I'm just gonna work with this begin point. And what I can do is I can actually draw a collision sphere to check, right? I can do what's called a sphere overlap actors. And I can check if it's overlapping a player. The way we do that is I can drag off of object types here. This is an enum, but it's an array. So if I type in array here, I can go make array. And we can draw a sphere that checks for pawns, right? Or if you wanted to, you could even plug in just the third person character under class filter. So for example, I can scroll all the way down. Actually, I'm just going to type third person character. It still needs object type, so make sure you do this. I can filter for third person character, and the radius of the sphere, let's have it be like 80 is a good number. And this position, we don't want to spawn the sphere at 0, 0, 0. That's literally like, I think that's like right here in the middle of the map. That just wouldn't be a good spot to put it. We want to spawn this on the actual enemy. But the way we do that is we want to spawn it in front of the enemy. If I just do a get actor location, plug this in, then every time the AI attacks, it's going to spawn a little collision sphere in the middle of the character. So that's not correct. We want to spawn it like in front of the player. So there's multiple ways, or in front of the character, or in front of the AI. There's multiple ways you can do it. You can either do a little bit of math and get the location of the actor and then get a point in front of it. Or we could add, like, for example, we could add a little sphere collision here. We can call this the attack point or something. And we can drag this in here and then do, I think it's get world location. Plug that in. Okay. Now the problem is we won't be able to see this sphere. So we have to do what's also called, this is just to help us in the development process. You can do draw debug sphere. Again, the same thing. I'm going to plug in this here because this is where we want to draw it. Same radius. We'll make it red or pink, whatever. And this is just to help us see the sphere. This attack point is in the middle of the player or the enemy. So that means the sphere will spawn in the middle of the enemy. Hopefully, if everything works as planned. Okay, I didn't see the sphere. Make a thickness of 2. Oh, I didn't do radius. That's why 80. Oops, stupid me. Okay, so you can see the sphere spawning in the middle of the enemy. 80 is kind of big. I'm going to bring it down to 60. And you can see that it spawned in the middle of the enemy. So I can actually take this sphere now and move it out. I'll actually make the radius way smaller here because this is just for us to spawn the attack sphere. There you go. So you can see it's a little bit in front now. And that's actually good. If you watch the actual attack, you can see its blade comes out to about here. So maybe we want it, maybe we do want it to be about 80. And then maybe we want to bring it out just a little bit farther. Something like that. We don't want it to be, well, let's see. Let's try it again. We don't want it to be farther than the blade. Yeah, so we definitely want to bring it in a little bit. Okay. Bring it back in a little bit like that. All right. Okay, so the blade pretty much made it to the end of the edge. So you have to just do some testing on your own, but now that we have that, we know that's a good radius. Now we can set up what to actually do. On this out actors, you can see that it's an array, and what we have to do with this is use a for each loop with it. That's just what we have to do. And what this means is that every actor that gets hit in that pink circle that you saw, let's do something to it. In our case, we're only filtering for third-person characters. So just to see if it works, I can do a print string. And it should print out the character. So you can see it's printing the character. So we know it's working. So what do we want to do to the player? We want to damage the player. So kind of like what we did with the laser, I can apply damage. So let's do that. Let's apply damage. And how much damage? Well, it's going to depend on your monster, right? So we want to make this a variable as well. Call it damage. Make sure you set the damage type, and then the damage causer is the enemy. So just do a reference to self here. And now in the enemy forest, we can set its damage now. So let's come to class defaults. And let's say it does a damage of like 10. Okay. And now let's come to the player. And like we did with the enemy where we have this damage event, what's really cool is I can just select all this in the enemy base, copy it. And then here in the third person character in the player, I can actually paste it. And it's going to give us some errors. It's like, oh, you don't have a death event. That's okay. I'll just delete the death event. And then it's going to say, oh, these variables, I don't know what this is. Oh my gosh. All you got to do is right click and do create variable health. And then we're good to go. So now for the player, let's say the player has 100 health. So now every time the player gets hit by this enemy, he's taking 10 damage. And the player will have 90 health, or will lose 10 health. So just to show this in action, I can do a print string. I can plug in the health here. It should say 90 in the corner, so it says 90, so the player lost 10 health. Now we have an issue where the AI is only attacking once. The way you would fix that is in the enemy here. On success, it attacks the player. So after attacking, what we can do again is maybe we delay for 1 whole second, and then we chase player again. I just realized we need to plug something into the target here, but we don't have that set. So on the chase player event, let's actually make this a variable. So just pull it off and call this the player target. So let's chase the player. And then here in chase player, we can plug in the player target. Okay, so when we play, he's now attacking. And if I start running, he should start chasing me. So he's chasing me, gets to me, and he attacks. Okay, so you can see how this game's starting to come together. And honestly, this is way too quick. The AI is way too fast. So what we need to do is come to the enemy forest here. Actually, let's come to the enemy base. Let's make the default movement speed 300. We have to come to the character movement component to do that. So now the forest should be at 300. Okay. Now because we changed it to 300, I need to come back to the animation blueprint for the forest. And in this transition, I did greater than or equal to 300. I'm going to set this to like 100 actually, just to make sure it works for sure. Now the AI is much slower, allows the player to escape and actually play the game so the player can turn around and kill him. Okay, so you see another issue where the AI is still chasing the player, even though it's dead. So to fix that, what we need to do is when the player dies, we need to stop this move to. The way we can do that is you can drag off the character movement and do disable movement. Plug that in. And then there was another issue, if you noticed it. I hit the player a second time, and the death animation played again, so like repeated. And the way we stop that is we can just do a Boolean check here. So on death, we can set a new variable. We can make a Boolean here that sets the enemy to be dead. So make a new variable, call it dead. And then up here, let's make it a Boolean. I'm going to drag this off and actually set it to true here. Okay, so the enemy's now dead. Set to true. And we only want to run this stuff here one time. So I'm going to pull this back, and then I'm going to drag this off and go do a true false statement here. Is the enemy dead? If it's not true, then let's set it to true and do all this stuff. So when I if I shoot the enemy again after it's already done all this stuff, it won't continue because dead is now true, so it'll just not do anything else. Okay, this is just a little fix for that animation issue that you saw, if you caught it. I can come over here and I can shoot him a few times. I'm still hitting him, but yeah. Oh, he kind of did some weird stuff at the end there. Oh well. There is another issue. He is rotating. And just to show that, I'm going to disable this begin play. I want to be able to move from the beginning. Whoops. I just need to plug this in here. This is just to show you what's happening. Okay. So I can kill him. He dies, but he's still rotating towards me because he's still trying to move towards me. And the reason for that happening is this AI move to is actually being ran. If you hover over it, it just says simple order for pawn with AI controller. So basically the AI controller is still trying to move the pawn to the player. And so the way we can do that is we can actually stop this movement altogether with the AI controller. So we actually don't need to come into the AI controller to do this. You could make an event here and then, tell it to stop logic or whatever. But what we want to do is we can actually just type in get controller, and then type in stop movement. You can see it's AI navigation stop movement. This is one way to do it, but no, I know this one will work. So if we play, I kill him and you can see it just kind of stops all that. So yeah, so now you're kind of starting to see the logic here starting to come together. So now if I started adding a bunch of different monsters here, you start to see how the game's coming together, right? Player gets hit. I'm losing health each time I'm hit. That guy stopped working for some reason, not exactly sure why. But yeah, you can kind of see how it's starting to come together. This is the point where I would start to flesh out like a very simple level. Start plugging in the enemies and making them move towards the player and things like that. So it's up to you how you want to do your levels. You can always come into here, go to free, just look through the free content, right? Every month, check what's free for the month, check what's permanently free. Like this environment set is free for this month. I could add this into my game and make this the level. So I'm actually going to leave this part up to you, the freedom of creating your level. This is up to you what kind of level you want to use. Depending on when you watch this video, who knows what's going to be free. I don't want to spend an hour creating a level. I do want the player to actually be able to die as well, right? So let's come to the player here. Keep this like this for now, just for debugging purposes. So let's make our own death event in the player. When the health is less than or equal to 0, let's do death. So when the player dies, just like with the enemy, we want to play death animation. Now, here you can see that in the enemy base, we're playing this death animation. We don't want to do that. We want to make this a variable as well. And actually, you can't make this animation a variable. I forgot about that. So the proper way to do this is to actually kill the AI in the animation blueprint. So to do that, we have to come into the animation blueprint. We got to come to the animation graph, and we need to do some logic here that will kill the player. And the way we do that is if you right click here, type in blend poses by bool, you can now blend animations together. So I'm going to plug this into false, and the bool here is, dead, right? So promote a variable, let's say dead. All we're saying here is when dead becomes true, the player has killed the AI. Let's play an animation here. As long as this is false, just continue running the regular locomotion. So by default, this is false, so the regular locomotion will continue. No problem. But when it becomes true, for this particular character, we want to run this death animation. So I'm going to browse to it and drag it to the animation blueprint. All right, and you can actually test how this looks. I can just come to the preview editor, click on dead, and it'll play the death animation, right? You can see it's looping. That's not what we want. So make sure you uncheck loop animation up here. And then it'll stop. Okay, so now back in the event graph, how do we know that the AI is dead? Well, in the enemy base, we created a dead variable. So now in the animation blueprint, you can actually search for it. The way we do that is animation blueprints kind of have like a begin play. I can go event, scroll up, event blueprint begin play, but I'm going to do event blueprint initialize animation. What I'll do here is I'm going to copy this try get pawn owner. I will cast to the enemy base. I will promote this to a variable and we'll call this the enemy. And then now here, I can drag off and I can get the dead variable. And so we're constantly checking if the AI is dead. So I can actually drag off the dead variable from the AI here, plug that in. And so this dead variable will always be false until the enemy actually dies right here. So this gets set to true on the actual enemy base class, and then the animation blueprint will update their own dead variable. So now when I play, you can see it dies. Attacks. He's dying. Okay, so you can see how the game's kind of coming together here. Of course, it's a little sloppy, but I mean, it's pretty good for, just like a couple hours, right? Once you get a nice looking level, it's going to start looking pretty cool. So hopefully you're learning a lot so far. You're getting your, hands dirty in the engine, kind of just learning how things work at a very basic level. So what I want to do with the player, so I want to do something very similar, right? When the player loses health, I want the player to die as well. So here in the player, we'll make a dead variable, set it to true, and we'll come into the player animation blueprint, this Bellica one. And in the event graph here, I'm just going to ignore everything else here because it's advanced, and I'll just drag this down here. And we'll do the same exact thing. We'll do blend poses by bool. Plug that in. This goes to false. This bool here becomes a new variable called dead. The true pose is going to be death A. Make sure it's not looping. Now in the event graph here, we can just check if the players died. So it's casting here. I'm going to make this a variable here. Player. Just going to hook that up really quickly. And then right here, I'll just go like this. What was it called? Oh, actually, this is incorrect right here. We want to cast to third person character. Let me delete this player variable. Okay, promote this to a variable, call it player. All right, there we go. You don't have to worry about this. We're not using this. And then we go player, get dead, and then set this to dead. And then make sure you hook this up here too. Okay. All right. So hopefully when the player dies, if I set dead to true, player dies. So hopefully that'll work. So let's just play. Let's just let them attack me for a bit, get me low. All that jiggling you see will fix it. Okay, so I die. So it does die correctly. Okay, so that jiggling issue, let's come back to the enemy base. Let's come to our character movement. Scroll down. We want to come to the navigation section. Oh, no, this is called avoidance. We want to use RVO avoidance. Yes, true. So what this does is this actually makes the AI kind of avoid each other. See how they're kind of avoiding each other? They're still jiggling around, but they're a little bit better at avoiding each other. They're not great. But yeah, they're better, just not great. So now let's create a very simple UI for the player, just so we can see the player's health. So up here in the content folder, I'll just make a new user interface widget. We'll just call this the player UI. Okay, open this up. So if you never used widget blueprint before, it's kind of complicated, but I'll try to make it as easy as possible. We want basically health in the corner here, and then maybe like a score over here, but let's just do health first. I'm gonna type in box, and we can get what's called a horizontal box, and I'll add this to the panel first. And we use these boxes because you can put elements inside of them. So instead of just adding a text and then like a progress bar, we want to use actual box first. So as you can see, it's anchored to the left corner, which is good. We want it there. What I'm going to do though is rename this horizontal box to, I'll just call this the health box. I want to change the alignment here because I don't like it being stuck in the corner. You can actually just move it with your mouse here. Do something like that. And then I'm going to add some text into it now. So I'm going to drag text and put it in. And the order does matter when you're working with these, when you're working in the UI, whatever order you have, it does matter. In our case, this is a horizontal box, so things will be going next to each other horizontally. If we did a vertical box, they'd be going down. Okay. Now we also want a progress bar, so if I add it, you'll see that it's actually to the right of it, see? Now I know it's kind of confusing, but I'm going to up the size here. Like that, and I'll move this back. For this text block, I'm just going to call this health, colon, enter. For the progress bar, I'm going to rename this to the health bar. We actually want to do what's called a fill, so it fills up the whole thing. Okay, so now let's work on the color for it. So the way we do that is in the style here. Background image, I want the tint, I want the alpha to actually be 0. And then I want the percent to be 1. So it's 0 to 1. That's how these progress bars work. It's not 0 to 100%, 0 to 1. So 1.0 is actually 100%. So 0.5 would be 50%. Let's make the color red for health. So by default, we're at 1.0. Okay. So now we need to draw this to the player screen, this UI. The way we do that is in the third person character on begin play, I do what's called a create widget. And now here's where we can put player UI, player controller. There we go. And then we can promote this to a variable and call this the player UI. And we want it as a variable because we want to be able to update this progress bar. So we can actually update this progress bar in the event graph up here on the right, which we'll get to in a second. For now, we want to add the player UI to variable, and then we want to do what's called add to viewport. This will actually draw the UI on the screen. So now when I play, I have the health up here. Now, obviously the health isn't being updated even though the player is losing HP. So we have to update the health bar every time the player gets hit. And the way we do that is through the UI. So in the UI here, I can come to the graph. I can make a simple event graph here. Or I'm sorry, I can make a simple event, just do custom event, just like in regular Blueprint, and do update health. And because our health is a green float value, we want to make an input of type float, call it health. And we just want to update the percentage, right? Like I said, it's from 0 to 1. So we know the player's health is 100 right here. So all we want to do is update this health bar percentage. So you can see by default, this health bar right here, it says is variable. It's checked by default. This text is not checked by default, but you can always make text a variable and update text as well. In our case, we're just going to update the health bar. So what I can do is I can drag in this health bar. And then off of here, I can set you can set the values over here on the right that you see. So in our case, we have percent. So I want to set this percent every time the player takes damage. So I'll just drag off this. I'll type in percent and we can set percent. So what do we want to set it to? Well, remember, it's from 0 to 1. So we want to take the health and actually divide it by 100 because the player has 100 health, right? Now this is very basic. You could get more advanced, of course, and when I come to the player now, so every time the player takes damage, we want to call this update health event. And the way we do that is we set our widget to a variable called player UI. So I can actually drag the player UI here, and then I can call that update health function. And basically every time the player takes damage, we'll update the health, right? So I can just plug in health. Okay. So now when I play, every time I take damage, the health bar should decrease. So you can see it going down. There might be another issue here when it hits 0. Oh, no. Yeah, so that works. Cool. So the player's dead. We can do another thing with the UI here. We can get kind of crazy. We can make this new text on the canvas panel. I'm going to anchor it to the center here, and then I'm going to reposition like this. Then I'm going to type 0.5 for the alignment, and this will center it completely. I can type in, game over, size to content, and then I can come to font and really bump it up. So now if I play, it's just a big game over, right? That's ugly. So what I can do is I can scroll down and set the visibility to hidden. Now when I play, it's hidden. But we want to make it visible when the player dies, right? So let's come over to the top here. I'm going to call this the game over text. Oops. Game over text. I will make it a variable. Then now in the graph, I can do a little Boolean here. I can go, if health is less than or equal to 0, if it's false, we want to set the percent. If it's true, we also want to set percent to 0 as well, if it's true. But then we want to make this text, and we want to, anyway, this just looks weird here. We want to actually, let me show you. So how do we make it visible, right? So if you remember down here, it was called visibility. So in the graph, I can actually come off here, then type in visibility, and we can set the visibility. So by default, we have it set to hidden, but now we're going to set to visible when the player is at 0 health. So when I die, hopefully that text will get set to visible. There you go. Okay. Now there's a lot more things we could add on to this game. We could add on to like sound effects, visuals, where every time the player is hit, there's like a sound effect, maybe like an armor chink or something like that. But for the most part, this is a pretty good entry-level video. If you want to see a part 2, just let me know and we can do that. But hopefully this tutorial has taught you a lot about the engine. That's the whole point of this video. I'm not here trying to help you make a full-fledged game. I'm just trying to show you how you can create a bunch of different stuff in the engine just to get you started, just to get you comfortable with the engine. The goal is to get you comfortable. As the name says, it's just a top-down shooter. You know, you can come in here, shoot the enemies, kill them, and you have some very basic understanding of AI, spawning projectiles, dealing damage, updating your UI, things like that. You have some very basic things going on here. So now at this point, what I would recommend is that you're ready now to move forward into like a full-fledged course, things like that, like further into tutorials that will go into more details, maybe start dabbling a little bit in multiplayer, stuff like that. So that's what I would recommend at this point. I would say that's the next step, right? It's still, you know, game development is really hard. No matter what anyone tells you, it's hard. So it's still like a long journey that you're going to be on for a while, learning all the basics. I usually say that when it comes to Unreal Engine and game development in general, you're a beginner for your first year. Then after your first year, you're kind of like, depending on how many hours you put in, you're moving on towards being like intermediate. And then after like 3 to 4 years of game development, then you might understand the engine at an advanced level. So really approach game development as like a lifestyle. This is like a long-term hobby slash lifestyle that you need to accept. That's just going to be a long time. And, you know, with that said, you should still try to create your own dream game. I think that's the best way to stay motivated, but just be realistic about it. Take your time and just, you know, learn things slowly and really try to master the fundamentals. Really try to understand how collision works, understand how spawning things like spawning actors, things like that works. Try to understand how AI works and animation, things like that. There's so many things that go into game development. And then we didn't even touch on things like, you know, world building or materials and things like that. So just so much that goes into it. So just, you know, take your time, have fun with it. And, you know, going forward, look for some courses. I have courses on Udemy that you can check out in the description. Those are pretty good. People tend to really like them. And then I have my Discord channel that you can come in as well. And of course, subscribe to my channel if you like this video. So that's going to do it, guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon. Let me know what you would like to see in a second video, and then perhaps I'll put one together. So thank you guys, and I'll catch you later.